Well, good morning, and thank you very much indeed for making it here instead of heading for the slopes or heading home, because in many ways this is the most important part of the last 5 days, capturing what has been said, what has been offered as ideas, and the convergence of those ideas and what is possible. And that's what we're going to try and bring together over the next hour and 50 minutes. I was tempted to ask the pharaohs and the enormous Egyptian statues we had here yesterday to stay. But they've all been moved overnight, literally in the last 2 or 3 hours, and here we are to talk about those very pressing issues. Can I remind you why you've assembled? We want to review what has been achieved since the town hall meeting in here on Wednesday afternoon. 700 people at tables pushing forward ideas. Find out how they have produced some kind of consensus on what is possible, what might be possible, and perhaps what is missing at the moment. And what is missing is just as important to hear from the platform and from you as what has been achieved. It's about proposed initiatives. It's about what has the greatest opportunity for progress later this year and into next. I'll ask Jed Davis now to give a more formal capturing of what we think, after 700 have been whittled down to 150 people in workshops and a big meeting yesterday, to capture those key elements of issues and initiatives for the next year. Jed Davis.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, it's really pleasing to see so many people after the wonderful evening last night. I guess we all got to bed quite late. What I'd like to do is to briefly remind you of the process that we had entered into. We've had, I think, an extraordinary week with many, many personalities, I think some great sessions, interactive sessions. But at the core of this annual meeting has been the desire to come together and to give a voice, the voice of Davos, to a number of the critical issues, and we voted on what they might be. I think I'd like to sort of kick off now with really what are the things we should do in 2005, which I see as the theme of the closing plenary. What I should say, just to remind you, from the opening session and the town hall meeting, we have in many different ways come together to both listen to, reflect on, even discuss what should be done with an eye on 2005. Now is the opportunity to just come back with some of the highlights. I think what we should bear in mind, these are not what would be traditionally called World Economic Forum initiatives. They're really much more a view from Davos as to where the focus should be in 2005 if we're going to make progress in the critical areas that we've identified. So let us move to the first one, which is poverty. And what I've highlighted here really are the top two. On poverty, much had been discussed. We've heard a number of initiatives presented in Davos on funding mechanisms. I think quite simply at the top is the desire to move quickly on these. Let's be clear, as many have said, there are many qualifications around the detail, as many have said, and which is true, as we know, in most policy areas. It's the devil in the details, which really is always a tough issue. Secondly, to renew the commitment to the Millennium Development Goals target and to move forward. And there's been ample suggestions of specific movement required in that area over the last few days. If we move to equitable globalization, really we're moving trade to the center here, urgency around the Doha round, and with a specific focus on Africa, really to move faster with the implementation of NEPAD, and with a particular focus on competitiveness of individual African nations. And clearly this is not unconnected to progress on the Doha round, and in particular the treatment of tariffs and so on vis-à-vis Africa and the OECD area. I think the third area is climate change. Two issues at the top. The first one is a rather technical issue. I think there's a recognition that when we're building coal-fired plant, we need to keep in mind that technology changes, that at some point out there, the options may exist for sequestration of carbon. Now, there aren't very many options at the moment, but certainly the suggestions from the technical group were we should keep in mind when we develop and implement investments in coal-fired plant that we should try to ensure that retrofitting is easier than it might otherwise be. I think the second issue really is almost the beyond Kyoto issue, which is to embrace more countries. And we know this is an extremely tough task, but like all tough tasks, they need a beginning. And the view is that that beginning should be in 2005. If we turn to education, on the education side, there was a long discussion around various options, but I think a significant one that came up is a recognition that some mechanisms need to be thought through for the support of parents, and in particular focus here on women, to look at models for addressing that. Education is seen as the core platform to address many of the issues that have come up, and particularly in the context of poverty. And I think with that, again, a very strong emphasis on girls' education. From the studies that have been done, and I refer to our own, it's very clear that competitiveness is quite directly connected to the extent and level of girls' education. This is a win-win area and is worth focusing on. And let me conclude with the emphasis on global governance initiatives. Two of them here. A desire to push forward here on the G20 leaders. We know there are many, many difficult issues that exist in this area, but there are also ample issues that could be worthy of discussion, and I won't repeat what's up there. And finally, non-proliferation, critical issue. Desire here to push forward on the bottom-up implementation of plans for UN Security Council Resolution 1540, with a particular focus on bottom-up ideas for non-proliferation. And I'm sure we'll hear more of that as we go through the morning. So I'd like to conclude. I'd like to thank everybody who's been involved in this, right from the beginning, through the meeting, and yesterday. This is a start. Let me emphasize again, these are ideas, proposals, thoughts as to what should be on the global agenda for 2005. They are not specific initiatives of the forum, but we will, of course, as we always do, look at all urgent issues and begin to see what we as a smaller organization can do. So let me conclude and leave the list up there and pass back to Nick. Thank you.
Thank you, Jed. Let me tell you how this is going to work between now and 12 o'clock. We're going to be up here for the next hour and 5 minutes. Then we're going to do a hot switch, and the co-chairs will come up and reflect on the potential for business. And then at the end, Klaus Schwab will give some closing remarks just before 12 o'clock. What we're going to do is hear from the five distinguished people up on the platform here, a lower platform, because we wanted to make this a little more inclusive than being up there and you down there. And we want to hear about 8 minutes of reflections, no more please, of what you think of these, each of these individual concepts, initiatives and issues. And at the end, we will also hear an important statement on the Korean Peninsula and the North Korean nuclear issue from South Korea. So what I'd like to do as well is offer you the chance just to come back very quickly, not long speeches please, very quickly, just for clarification on any of the remarks from up here on the platform. Let me ask Kumi Naidu, first of all, to give your reflections, Kumi, and just to underline that Kumi is here partly as chair of the Global Call to Action Against Poverty, which is a new coalition of NGOs and trade unions and faith organizations which was brought together just before he arrived here and also as we were meeting in Davos. Kumi.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The first reflection is that the theme of poverty is central to all the other themes that we have, because you cannot talk about addressing poverty without addressing the issue of global governance, without addressing the issue of education, without addressing the issue of inequitable globalization. So while I think that it has been helpful to separate some of these issues out, my first point is that we need to understand that key and central to us moving the world forward in the next year and beyond is understanding that human beings live integrated lives. They don't have a part of them which says education, another part that says health, another part that says something else. So unless we understand the challenge of addressing the challenges that we face in the world today has to be in an integrated way, and unless we understand that poverty is the rubric under which we need to be actually working, we will make many tactical errors in the way that we move forward. I want to focus now briefly on some of the gaps that we have not addressed so that we can think about that as we move forward. The first gap is that even though there has been more discussions on gender equality, I think this panel here eloquently makes the point about the fact, the all-male panel, eloquently makes the point that humanity continues to deprive itself of the knowledge, skills, and experience of the population on this planet. And this is not a question of political correctness. This is a question of dignity, it's a question of democracy, it's a question of harnessing the full potential of all the citizens on this planet. And a failure of any leading institution to take seriously the issue of gender inequality is a fundamental ethical error. The other gap that I find is that sustainable development, which used to have a higher presence in the discourse of the World Economic Forum in the past, has not had, I believe, as much attention that we need. Because when we talk about tough choices, we need to understand that one of the biggest problems we have in this world right now is a problem of overconsumption. If we do not address the reality, for example, that what North America and Western Europe spend annually on pet food alone, that amount could feed the entire African continent nutritional food, and those imbalances of overconsumption. I just want to say I've got nothing against pets, by the way, but the issue is the inequities, but also when we look at consumption patterns, if we do not address the question of consumption patterns in the developed world, 20 years down the line, the challenges that we face would look like an early morning picnic. My next gap is, we've talked a lot about poverty, we've talked a lot about addressing various issues. The one word that has not had any substantial currency this year that has to be addressed is the word of employment. You cannot address the issue of poverty in a sustainable way if we are not seriously focused on addressing the issues of creating jobs with dignity, sustainable jobs, and so on. None of us sitting in this room are unemployed, I presume. And those of you who have lived through moments of employment will understand that employment is not only about money. It's not only about being able to provide your children with the nurturing environment, but it's also fundamental about having dignity in the world and having a sense of inclusion in the world. I was very pleased on the one hand that Africa has had the highest level of focus at this World Economic Forum than before. There is clearly a sense of compassion, a sense of urgency, and people want to support and provide solidarity. As an African, I want to welcome them. However, I want to make a very big appeal that it is very important that when we talk about Africa and when we talk about the people of Africa, that we need to be cautious, that we talk about them with dignity. We do not talk about them as basket cases that have no capacity and that are waiting for the rich world to come and throw resources in our direction to help us out. And very importantly, it's important that the agenda of Africa is championed and led by Africans themselves, and yeah, I mean African governments and African civil society, because we know that the tragedy that Africa finds itself in today is a result of history being extremely unkind to Africa. Colonialism, slavery, the way Africa was kicked around as a political football during the Cold War. It's critical that today, when we think about moving Africa forward, that the voices of Africans, the perspective of Africans and so on is central, and that the leadership of moving the African continent forward comes from Africans themselves. The question of global governance, yes, we've tackled it, but I want to say that when we talk about hard choices, we must also talk about the hard truths. The hard truths about global governance is that today we live in a world where real power has shifted increasingly from the national level to the global level, where today you can't simply think globally and act locally. You have to think locally and act globally, because that's where real power actually resides around issues of environmental governance, trade, and so on. But today, even though the global institutions have huge power, they have a deep, deep democratic deficit, and they are still stuck in the geopolitics of 1945. We are about to appoint a new president of the World Bank. For those of you who don't know, the way the president of the World Bank gets appointed, this is a global public institution. It's appointed by basically the president of the United States. The governance of the World Bank is on a $1, one vote system. And if we are talking about seriously addressing the issue of democratic global governance, we have to go back and address the deep democratic deficits that exist in these organizations. And even though we've talked about it a little bit, we've not put these tough issues on the table. Lastly, I want to just conclude with the question of political will. I think that much of what we discussed here, many of us would see it as common sense logic, and that there are things that we really could be doing. For us who come from the developing world, we feel a deep sense of pain that for certain things, such like what Kofi Annan has called an illegal war in terms of international law being waged in Iraq, huge amounts of money can be mobilized very quickly for what was an action that didn't have the support of the majority of the citizens on this planet. But when we talk about the question of aid, for example, 30 years ago, 0.7% was committed to by the rich countries of the world in terms of supporting development. Now, 30 years is a long time, dear brothers and sisters, to wait for less than 1%. And most countries, with the exception of 5, have not got close to that. So I want to just conclude by saying that with the words of Mahatma Gandhi, he said, "This planet has enough to meet all of humanity's need, but not all of humanity's greed." And unless we have the kind of political will to move forward, we're not going to move forward. And I just want to say, I did not get injured yesterday, and I'm wearing a white headband. The white band is going to be the symbol of global mobilizations of ordinary citizens across this planet in 2005, around the G7 meeting, around the Millennium Summit, and so on. And I would invite you to visit our website, whiteband.org, if you would like to get involved. Thank you very, very much.
Before I go to Al Gore, would anyone like to jump in at that point, just to clarify anything, or just to check anything out with Kumi? Can't see any hands going up. Right. Al Gore, your view of what has been decided, particularly on climate change. You have 8 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. I want to congratulate Klaus Schwab and the organizers of this year's conference and the forum generally. And I'm honored to be among these colleagues here. There's much I would like to say about each of these topics, but I'll confine my remarks to climate change. I think it's important to establish the fact that climate change is different from any of the other challenges on the list, because we are now on the brink of doing irreparable damage to the global environment upon which all of these other goals depend. And it is sometimes difficult to absorb the nature and magnitude of what is going on in the climate. It's difficult because it's brand new in world history. It is different from any problem we have faced in the past. It's difficult also because there is an active disinformation or propaganda campaign on the part of some who anticipate some of the solutions that will be proposed and want to draw the line on recognition of the problem. In my country, many years ago, the scientific community produced evidence linking the smoking of cigarettes with lung cancer and emphysema and other lung diseases. but for several decades, some of the tobacco companies financed a propaganda disinformation campaign to dispute the scientific consensus and delay recognition of the truth. Something similar is going on now with respect to this climate crisis. The climate crisis is, in one way, a symptom of a collision between world civilization as it is currently operating and the ecological system of the Earth. There are other symptoms. The fisheries of the world are being depleted at a rapid rate. Of the 20 major world fisheries, 17 are in a state of collapse. There are international efforts to try to deal with this, but it's another symptom. The biodiversity of the Earth is threatened by an extinction rate that is now 1,000 times faster than the normal background rate. And there are others, but the most important symptom and the single environmental crisis that is more serious than the others has to do with the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is the most vulnerable part of the Earth's ecology because it is so thin. It's hard to sometimes to imagine that from here to the top of the sky is only a few kilometers. And that envelope is now being filled up with greenhouse gases, principally carbon dioxide, but others as well, that trap a much higher proportion of the infrared energy that normally radiates back out into space. And as a result, glaciers all around the world are melting. There are very few exceptions to that. Here in Switzerland, the number of days with frost has declined year by year dramatically. As that has occurred, the number of invasive exotic species has gone up. We saw the particular effects in the Arctic and Antarctic. There are large ice shelves in the Antarctic Peninsula that are now breaking off every year, the size of small American states. 3 years ago, in January of 2002, an ice shelf the scientists call Larsen B, which was expected to last another 100 years, began to break up, and 35 days later, on March 5th, it was completely gone. The scientists were astonished, and in going back to analyze the satellite photographs, they began to understand a phenomena they had not understood before. When water melts on the top and sinks in, it doesn't refreeze, it tunnels down to the bottom. And the ice mass, it looks like it's been attacked by termites, and it weakens and cracks. They now observe a phenomena almost identical to that beginning to happen on the surface of Greenland. And just as they had been forced to recalculate their understanding of the ice mass loss in Antarctica, now the scientists are raising alarm bells with respect to Greenland. And they don't know when or how quickly Greenland could crack up and melt. But if action is not taken very quickly to dramatically reduce these greenhouse emissions, it will irreversibly move into that phase. Greenland has a mass of ice which, if deposited into the ocean, would raise sea level worldwide by 6 meters, 20 feet. The West Antarctic ice shelf, which is slightly the part of Antarctica that's up on top of islands, is the most vulnerable part there. When and if it goes, that is another 7 meters. The Arctic ice cap is actually very thin, only 8 to 10 feet. I went up there twice, courtesy of the U.S. Navy in a nuclear submarine, as part of an effort to get the measurements of what's been happening to the Arctic ice cap. They now believe that most of it will be gone in this century, if not all, in summertime, because of the positive feedback loop. When ice melts, it no longer reflects the incoming solar radiation, and the open seawater absorbs it. The solutions go far beyond what is listed here. The very polite and gentle request that we consider new technology as we build new coal plants, and that we ask the 20 largest emitters to talk to one another, is not adequate. We have to change the way we in this world think about our relationship to the earth. It took 100,000 years to reach a population of 2 billion. In my lifetime, it's gone from 2 billion to 6 billion. And if I reach the demographic expectation for my generation, it'll reach more than 8 billion. That's a discontinuity. In many ways, population is a success story in that the demographic transition is happening more quickly than we could have hoped for. Just one more second. But within the next 35 years, the momentum already built into the system will create enough new urban area as what has been created in the previous 10,000 years. We have to make decisions now, in the near term, to change the way we are assaulting the integrity of the Earth's atmosphere. So I hope that next year, and would urge that those who design next year's conference would focus even more intently on exactly how we can catalyze a faster recognition of this crisis, this emergency, and then help to frame solutions that are adequate to the challenge.
Thank you, Al Gore. I'm proposing to go immediately on to the two politicians, because what we've just heard from Al Gore, decisions in the near term are urgently needed. And what we've just heard from Kumi Naidoo about the need for political will on poverty in Africa and so on is about political will. So, Prime Minister, could you go ahead and give your 8-minute reflection on these, and particularly the very clear pointer, which is that politicians are not acting fast enough on these urgent issues?
Well, thank you very much, Nick. I'd like to go, first of all, to the question of poverty. It still remains in both moral and political terms, and the two often can occupy the same ground, the biggest single challenge that the world has. I don't think there's much argument about that. I think the real issue, though, is how it is best tackled. And I don't disagree in general terms with what has been said by the moderator or the presenter at the beginning of this discussion about the responsibilities of the developed countries in relation to assistance. But there are two areas that I think need more emphasis. The first of those relates to my very strong view that the single greatest contribution the developed world can make to poverty alleviation is to dissolve, or at least begin to break down, trade barriers. Trade access is worth far more to underdeveloped countries than development assistance. It has always been the case, and if you look at the successful examples of economies that have moved from great poverty and underdevelopment. Look at the extraordinary development of a country like South Korea over the last 40 years, and think of the contribution that economic reform and trade liberalisation has made to that economy. And if you're looking at what can be done in 2005, and I took part in a debate a couple of days ago on BBC World, a lot of it revolved around differences of approach between the United States and Europe. And I said that one thing that the United States and Europe could come together on was to make a real success of the Doha round. And if that can happen, and you can give more trade access to the developing countries, I think that will make an incredible difference. Now that's important, and I speak as the Prime Minister of a highly developed, affluent economy. That people are aware of Australia's economic strength and good fortune and success. But I also understand the sentiment of electorates in democratic countries, in Western countries. And that causes me to address some remarks to those in the underdeveloped world that quite rightly call on the developed world to do more. Can I say that the electorates of developed countries are not always enamoured of the attempts that are made to improve governance in less developed parts of the world. And I think it's important at a gathering like this that we be frank with each other. The developed world can do more to open up trade access. I think those seeking the assistance of the developed world should understand that standards of governance, issues of corruption are very, very important to the attitude of electorates. In democracies, governments are influenced by public opinion. And there's no point in kidding otherwise. And public opinion wants to help the less fortunate in the world. Public opinion in my country as around the world was extraordinary in its generosity in responding to the tsunami crisis, which affected so many countries in our part of the world, particularly our nearest neighbour, Indonesia. There's no absence of genuine compassion, but there is a hard-headed view that resources allocated should be properly used. And that is an issue that has to be faced. So on the aid thing, can I say there's a responsibility on the part of the developed world to do more in relation to trade access as well as official development assistance. I'm not suggesting that that is not part of the equation. It's a very important part of the equation. And I think on the other side of the coin is, of course, the issue of governance. Now, can I say something about an issue that is not really on these in these 6 points? Perhaps it's a given at the World Economic Forum, but in case it's not a given, can I just stress the great importance of all economies to continue to apply themselves to the task of domestic economic reform, because domestic economic reform will add to the stock of world wealth and therefore the capacity of the developed countries to provide assistance to the least developed countries. And once again, speaking from the vantage point of a developed country, that the stronger you are, the greater capacity there is. And I think there's still a lot more effort needed in areas of deregulation and areas of economic reform to spur economic growth in the developed world so that we can make more progress on that front. Two other rather random points, and once again they relate to the near term. One of the great challenges of 2005 is to grab the opportunity for trying to get a lasting settlement in the Middle East. One of the great issues that bedevils the world is the ongoing dispute between the Palestinians and the State of Israel, and there are prospects of settlement of that dispute now that haven't been available for some years. And all people of goodwill, to use an old cliche, have a responsibility to put their shoulder to the wheel to see if something can be achieved on that front. I couldn't but endorse the reference to a greater emphasis on technology when it comes to energy. Australia is the largest coal exporter in the world, we therefore have quite an interest, not only in environmental terms but in domestic economic terms, in speeding the process of ways of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from things like coal. It shouldn't be a debate between whether you have emissions or not, or rather it should be a debate between whether you have emissions or not. It shouldn't be a debate about whether you sensibly use the world's resources. And in the short term, we will have to rely, and let's be realistic about it once again, we have to rely on resources such as coal and oil, and I think we have a heavy obligation to see if we can't accelerate as rapidly as we can the technology that's needed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I think once again, being realistic, that is a more viable option than some that are often put forward. I hope I haven't exceeded my 8 minutes,
no.
Mr. Chairman.
I'd just like to press you very quickly, Prime Minister, on this issue of political will, what we just heard from Al Gore, what we've heard from Kumi Naidoo on these issues, political will.
Well, I have, with great respect, Nick, I spent the first part of my speech talking about political will.
Decisions in the near term.
You don't define political will in terms of a set policy objective. You define political will in terms of the willingness of the leadership of countries to work towards achieving a goal that is workable. And what I sought to say in the beginning of my remarks is that if you really want to close the gap on the poverty front, trade access will do more than anything else. That will require political will from the leaders of the developed world, because it is the restrictive access policies of the developed world, particularly in agriculture, that are locking out the exports of many of the undeveloped countries. Now, that's political will on the part of people in the developed world, and I have to say to our friends in the less developed world that there is concern in the developed world, particularly in electorates who vote governments in and out about standards of governance, and that will require political will on their part to see that there are improvements. So I think we need political will on both fronts.
Thank you, Prime Minister. There is one intervention from the floor before I go to the President, please.
Political will and the will of the people.
Could you introduce yourself, please? And be quick about it.
Yeah, I'm Avram Sutanov, Rabbi Sutanov from Holland. And in the feeling of today, which started with the commemoration of Auschwitz, about the new emergency, the feeling of emergency, just in a second, I was that baby that was put in 43 in front of the open door. And a German in front of an open door, and a German woman in 43 had to make a split-second decision whether to open the door for me with all the consequences or to close it. I'm here because she opened the door. Millions of children are looking through the open door. Are we opening the door with all the prospects, with the alleviation of poverty and the preservation of a healthy climate, or are we closing the door? I'm very hopeful. As a rabbi who has been together with Muslims and Hindus and Christians in this conference, so much in a visibility of brotherhood and sisterhood, on a new alliance of business, of politics, of leadership, I'm hopeful in the Middle East. And therefore, as a citizen of this World Economic Forum, that baby that was saved, we will save, not later than 2015, not later than any minute, the children who are looking at us at the open door.
Thank you very much. President Kwasniewski, you've come here from Auschwitz, from remembering what happened 60 years ago. Can you try and make that linkage and help us establish that linkage between those remarks, political will, and these 6 critical points, and the additions being made by Al Gore and also from the Prime Minister and Kumi Naidoo?
So thank you very much. I will try to answer or to continue what I'm sorry that I don't know your name. Suganov. So, Ms. Suganov, so I will continue a little bit what you started to speak, but firstly I want to thank Professor Schwab and World Economic Forum that you organized this concept of a discussion about these issues of and initiatives of so important problems of the world. I think for us, for politicians, that is extremely interesting and helpful. Excuse me that I start with such remark, but normally if I'm in Poland Sunday morning, we have a lot of such media discussions in radio and TV. And when I'm asked about what is important in Poland or in the world, that nobody asked me about climate changes or poverty, but they asked me about presidential election in Poland, parliamentary election in Poland, situation in political parties, and what I will do after my presidency. So this is really good that we can find such place as World Economic Forum and Davos to discuss really important issues, really important problems for all of us, everywhere, in Poland as well. So thank you, Professor, and I think this idea is necessary to continue. Second remark. It's very difficult to say what is more and what is less important among these 6 or 5 groups of questions or issues or initiatives which were mentioned at the beginning of this discussion. I would like to concentrate my remark around education, because in fact I agree that poverty is a soil of many dramas, problems, violence, instability, terrorism, very many human dramas as well. But I don't know what is first. The first is poverty or first is lack of education. That is very philosophical and, in my opinion, not very much effective discussion. Education is extremely important, and I think all these problems which we mentioned in these 5 groups are to solve and to discuss and to take by politicians, business people, parallelly, together. That is not so that we can solve first problem and then second and then third, fourth and fifth. No, that is everything very much connected and very much interdependent. That is necessary to work on all these issues together, what is of course the real problem. Because it needs a lot of will, but it needs a lot of money, it needs a lot of time as well. But going to education again, I fully agree with these points which we have here among education initiatives. But one thing I would like to add, that is what you mentioned. Dear friends, I organized ceremonies of 60th anniversary of liberation Auschwitz-Birkenau camp. We had forum with young people, then we had ceremonies in the camp. 46 delegations participated from the world. And in fact, the one question is still open. Why it was possible? How it was possible? How it was possible in civilized world, in 20th century, killed in very practical way, with using all technologies, more than 1.2, 1.5, still the number is not sure, million people in this camp only. Because the number of all victims of concentration camp is much bigger, there's some millions. All victims of Second World War, that is 50 million people in the world, from all sides. How it was possible? Where is the reason? What is the soil of this tragedy? And unfortunately, this question is still open, and in fact is necessary to be active to discuss these issues the whole time. And our promise of participants of this meeting was, especially to young generation, that this discussion and this warning discussion we will continue, because it's necessary to find the real reasons of such drama which happened in Auschwitz-Birkenau. But one of these answers, maybe not, but one of more important answers, how to find this global answer for this drama is education. And first of all, education for tolerance and reconciliation among the people. I think that is what we don't have on the list of our priorities. Please, if we will not educate young Arabs and Jews and Poles and Germans and Ukrainians, Russians, Americans, Australians, Canadians, everybody in the world, that we are human beings. We are people which are born for peace, love, tolerance and dialogue. That is absolutely difficult then to have good politicians, good priests, good citizens, good soldiers, which understand that some values are extremely important. I discussed this issue with my Arabs and Israeli friends, and that is what, in my opinion, is one of the important elements to find peace solutions in the Middle East. First, the change books in the schools. Because if in these books you are enemies, then you are victims. So it's necessary to say, look, your friend from Palestine or your friend from Israel, maybe even more your friend from Israel, is your friend, is your colleague, is same man, girl or boy which you can keep to your football team or to be with him in the school. And this process is a good beginning to fight against intolerance, violence and hatred, which is a base for many of dramas which we have in the world. So if you ask me about something what I would like to add to this list of initiatives is to have some initiatives for reconciliation and education without stereotypes, without lack of tolerance, using teachers, professors, intellectuals, and to change, first of all, the books which we have in schools and which create such atmosphere of lack of confidence and sometimes hatred. And last point, I fully agree what is here about all initiatives, global governance and other initiatives, but I think for us politicians it's important to know what we have to do this year, 2005, and I think this year, I'm so sorry that maybe these problems which I will mention are a little bit, are not so global, but are important to reach these goals which we have on the papers. First, this time, really, this first 6 months of this year, maybe is the best timing to find good solutions and back to roadmap in Middle East. What's happened in Palestine, election in Palestine, re-election of Mr. Bush in the United States, new Israeli government, that is the chance for next some months, no more, to find some positive solutions to this problem. And in my opinion, Middle East is a cradle of many problems in the region and in the world, and I think that is what we should say here in Davos. We expect a lot of political initiatives, a lot of activities to solve this problem in this time. Second, Iraq. Today, you know, we have election. Unfortunately, we have some information about terrorist attack in electoral places, but still I'm optimist, and I think after this election Iraq will be more stable with own government, and we will start to discuss the presence of military forces on the other base, not as occupation forces or stabilization forces, how I name our role, Polish role in Iraq, but we can find stability and good prospects for this country. Third point, what I said during my speech 2 days ago, Ukraine needs support of the international community, politically, economically, to develop this movement which started during so-called Orange Revolution. Next point, that is last but not least, is Africa. Africa needs the real, concrete support in many forms, not only funds, not only money, not only fight against AIDS, but that's should be the real international global program of support for Africa. And if we will make real progress in these elements, we can be, during Davos 2006, in much better shape, with more optimism, and better prepared to next challenges. Because unfortunately, and I'm a veteran here in Davos, each year we have new challenges, new situation, and it's necessary to be ready to answer. So I think Davos plays such a role at the beginning of the year to concretize our thinking, our efforts, and that is why Davos is so important, and we are so grateful to organizers. Thanks.
You use the word reconciliation, and we're now going on to the Minister for Unification from the Republic of Korea. But just before the Minister speaks, can I just press you? You talk about Sunday morning television programs and how you're asked about you as the President, your future plans and so on. How do you get the kind of problems that Al Gore has identified, which Kumi is identifying, which poverty, Africa, on the agenda inside Poland, so that people are aware if democracy is about the pressure from public concern, if everything is as urgent as we've just heard from Al Gore?
Well, that's a good question. I try to do it so, and I criticize my journalists, what is very risky business.
Do they listen to
you? Very much to say, look, why you ask me about such stupid thing and we don't discuss about climate changes or poverty in Africa? But then after I argue so much that I think maybe not openly, but some in minds that is okay, that's good that Kwaśniewski is last year in this office because he thinks about such theoretical problems that it's maybe better to vote for next president for Poland, you know. That's, and that is reality. That is reality, what I can do. And a lot, but you started very, very risky discussion for you as well. Because in fact, we speak about political will. It was a question to Mr. Howard. And we have political will. We want to do, and especially if we are experienced politicians and we know the good things of politics and bad things of politics, so we are ready to have full will to realize these goals. But tell me, how to organize support of media? How to organize support of journalists? How to organize support of newspapers and TV? You are not interested to speak about serious things. Here in Davos, of course, yes. You, of course, yes. But look, majority of your colleagues. Look, majority of the colleagues. Information is scandal. Information, important problem or important issue is not information. I'm very brave man because I don't run.
Mr. President, that's exactly why I raised the question. And I have to say I chaired a conference about the failures of the media in not covering the Millennium Development Goals in London on the 24th of November. We are guilty, but it's not about the media here. But I just wanted to raise that question because it is about putting these things on the agenda. And I, as a member of the media here in Davos, am responsible for trying to push these things. I know very well
that journalists are... I was journalist, so that's the next reason why I can't speak about it so openly. But in self-defense, you are the best. Absolutely.
But people like me are not running for president. Right. I didn't introduce that levity. Al Gore, I'm not trying to steal the time from you, Minister, but Al Gore, given what you have said and given the problem still of getting this on the agenda in the United States, can I ask you very briefly, please, because I'm taking time from the Minister, can you shift this paradigm of it not being on the agenda at the moment, publicly?
We have to. We just have to. I think that this forum can play a major role in bringing about a change in thinking. You know, we have a problem with short-term thinking in almost every field now. And where we as a global civilization are concerned, we have a great problem in trying to think about problems that are global and that are new. There's an old story, it's a kind of, many of you have heard it, but it involves the science experiments with the frog that's dropped in a pot of boiling water, jumps right out. But if it's put in a pot of room temperature water and it's slowly brought to a boil, the frog will just stay there until it's rescued. I'm not going to boil the frog in the story. But I made that mistake before. But the point is that the frog's nervous system responds to a sudden contrast, but if the change, though deadly, appears deceptively gradual, the alarm bell doesn't go off. And we are like that fraud. We collectively, in the world where the global environmental crisis is concerned. I want to acknowledge, if she has not been acknowledged here this morning already, Wangari Maathai, the Nobel Peace Prize winner from Kenya. My longtime dear friend. And one among many changes that could take place is to encourage people throughout the world to adopt the model of the tree planting program that Wangari has innovated. And actually, investment managers would be well advised to look at this. She doesn't compensate the people who plant the trees until enough years have passed by that the tree has grown up and can survive. We now reward investment every quarter, regardless of whether the tree survives or not. And so I think we should attack the problem of climate change by shifting time horizons and taking a long-term perspective. The solutions are presently beyond the boundary of what is politically feasible. But all that means is that we have to expand the boundaries of what is politically feasible. And that requires communication globally from elites, leaders, down to the grassroots level. More change will happen with the women that Wangari Maathai talks with than will happen in the boardrooms. But the change has to take place in both places.
Thank you very much. Now to that issue of reconciliation and what President Kwasniewski mentioned. Can we turn now to Korea and Chung Dong-young, who's Minister of Unification for the Republic of Korea, with some prepared remarks for the next 7 minutes or so.
Thank you, Nick, and the leaders for the insight on issues discussed here in Davos. Rather than speaking broadly on the WMD and other issues, I want to focus on the North Korean nuclear issue, because it is not only important to the Korean Peninsula, but also to the entire world. Even in the post-Cold War era, we are still searching for ways to tackle poverty and conflict around the world. For Korea, pursuing peace and achieving permanent peace is our utmost priority. Peace on the Korean Peninsula can materialize only if the North Korean nuclear issue is solved. Now, South Korea is trying to do this through a peace initiative. As you know, Korea already experienced the war in 1950. The war devastated the land, divided our people, separated families. For us who remember the scar of the war, the military option should not be a choice. Peaceful coexistence and common prosperity are at the core of our peace initiative toward North Korea. In order to solve the North Korean nuclear issue, a six-party dialogue started in 2003. Unfortunately, the six-party talks have been deadlocked for 7 months long. It is time for the participating countries of the six-party talks to put forward concrete proposals to be discussed at the negotiating table. To break from the deadlock and advance the process, North Korea, in particular, must make its strategic decision now. Pyongyang must not miss this chance and waste time. Since 1990, North Korea has missed several opportunities. Now it must join the rest of the international community as a responsible member. The historical choice that North Korea makes by giving up its nuclear ambition will provide a chance for its regime survival and economic stability. To encourage North Korea to give up its nuclear ambition, the forward-looking perspective of the U.S. is also important. The U.S. needs to take on the negotiation with the North in a comprehensive approach. In this regard, I welcome the position of the President's second Bush administration that the North Korean nuclear issue should be resolved diplomatically and in a peaceful manner through the six-party talks. Indeed, the time for diplomacy is now, as remarked by Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice at confirmation hearing. I recall the pragmatic diplomacy of President Nixon, who made historic visit to China in 1972. The normalization of ties between two countries led to the reform and opening of China and led to the considerable improvement of human rights conditions in China. In contrast, the containment policy against Cuba has not worked. To encourage North Korea to become a member of the international community, economic cooperation and engagement are more effective than military pressure or containment. Once North Korea starts to give up its nuclear weapons program, our government will provide large-scale economic support for them. If inter-Korean dialogue resumes, we are willing to discuss comprehensive agricultural cooperation, which include grain, fertilizer, and agricultural machinery to solve the food shortage problem in the north. Meanwhile, the industrial complex that was launched in Kaesong, a city in North Korea just above the demilitarized zone, is an example of inter-Korean cooperation that is transforming conflict and confrontation into reconciliation and cooperation. We are still at the beginning stages, but once established and expanded, this industrial complex will be a symbol of South and North peace and common prosperity. The six-party talks is receiving international support as a framework to solve the North Korean nuclear issue. The six-party framework can develop into a multilateral security system, much like the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. While the rest of the world is building a new future, we still live with the pain of division. 2005 marks the 60th year of liberation from Japanese colonial rule and 60 years of territorial division. This year, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit meeting will be held in Busan, Korea in November. I hope before the APEC meeting takes place, there will be a substantial resolution on the North Korean nuclear problem through the six-party talks. And I hope in this meeting we can celebrate the resolution of the nuclear issue and declare the end of the Cold War on the Korean Peninsula. Some may hope that North Korean leaders participate in this meeting. Our government's vision is to create a Korea of peace and prosperity, overcoming the pain of division and war, and putting an end to the Cold War on the Korean Peninsula. With the support of the international community, our vision will come true. Thank you very much.
Minister, can I just ask for clarification? Do you believe that dialogue will be the way forward, or without an open door policy inside North Korea, could it be that there will be internal collapse which will produce eventually what you are aiming for, the unification?
Let me speak through my interpreter. 많은 사람들이 북한의 붕괴에 대해서 얘기하고 있습니다만은 현실성은 없는 얘기라고 봅니다.
There are many people who are talking about the collapse of the North Korean regime, but I think the chances of this is very slim.
왜냐하면은 북한은 그동안 수십 년 동안 빈곤과 그리고 고통 속에서 사는데 익숙해져 있고 외부 세계로부터 차단된 고립된 상태에서 붕괴되지 않고 살아남았습니다.
Because, as you know, the North Korean society has been closed for many years, and the people had to endure hardship. They're used to the enduring hardship.
그리고 북한 사회 내부에는 현재 체제에 저항하는 조직적인 그룹, 레지스턴스 그룹이 존재하지 않고 북한 사회 내부에는 시빌 소사이어티가 없기 때문에 그런 조직적 저항이 없는 상태에서 스스로 붕괴하기는 그 가능성이 굉장히 낮다 이렇게 봅니다.
In addition of the government having, or the military still having a very strong grip of control in their society, there is no organized resistance within to challenge the regime because of the lack of civil society. So unless attacked, the North Korean regime is not expected to, or we don't think that it will be expected to collapse.
붕괴는 바람직하지도 않습니다. 만일 붕괴하게 되면 그 혼란은 엄청난 것이 될 것이고 수백만 명의 난민들이 중국으로 또는 남한으로 쏟아져 들어올 때 이것은 uncontrollable한 상태가 될 것이 뻔하기 때문입니다.
Quite frankly, I think collapse is not also a desirable thing, considering the amount of refugees that would cross over to the border, create all this chaos in the society, in the region in general.
또 그리고 또 하나 우리가 유념해야 할 것은 바로 북한의 이웃인 중국과 남한이 북한의 붕괴를 바라지 않고 있다는 것입니다. 즉 중국은 그동안 정치적으로 경제적으로 북한에 대해서 많은 지원을 수십 년 동안 해왔고 북한이 붕괴되는 것을 결코 바라지 않고 있습니다.
In addition, we've got countries in the vicinity like China, South Korea, who would really not like to see the collapse of the regime, especially China, because it has politically and economically supported North Korea for so long.
우리 정부 입장에서는 그래서 아까 말씀드린 피스 이니셔티브를 통해서 이 핵 문제를 평화적으로 해결하고 평화 공존 그리고 공동 번영을 추구하는 것이 우리의 정책입니다.
So from the South Korean government's perspective, we would like to solve the issue diplomatically in a peaceful manner. To reach, of course, a permanent settlement of peace on the Korean Peninsula.
알고 부통령께서 전에 행정부에 계실 때 그 클린턴 행정부도 이 협상을 통한 해결을 추구해 왔듯이 우리는 이 육자회담이라는 틀을 통해서 평화적으로 핵 문제를 해결할 수 있고 그렇게 되면 북한은 붕괴 대신 중국과 같이 베트남과 같이 그런 개혁 개방의 길을 걸을 수 있을 것이라는 기대를 갖고 있습니다.
Of course, Vice President Al Gore is here, but during his time in office, of course, there were movements or efforts to try to solve this very serious problem in a peaceful manner through negotiations. So in that manner, we would like to do that through the six-party talks, hoping to find a solution through this framework, and so that eventually we'll be able to create a model very much like China or Vietnam.
But given the acute concerns about regional stability, my other question would be this. What do you believe, what can you share with us about what you believe will be the critical move which will persuade North Korea to give up its nuclear development program?
최근에 평양에 다녀온 미국 하원의 그 웰던 의원이나 란토스 의원 또 유엔 총회 의장인 장핑 의장이 전한 메시지는 분명합니다.
Recently, there were some U.S. congressional delegations that went to the United States, including Congressman Weldon and Mr. Lantos. And in addition, Mr. Zhang Ping, the UN President of the UN General Assembly. The message was the same.
그것은 북한은 궁극적으로 핵 보유가 목적이 아니라 한반도의 비핵화를 목표로 하면서 동시에 공존의 희망, 이대로 체제가 붕괴하지 않고 살아남고 싶다는 그런 그 공존의 희망을 바깥 세계에 전하고 있습니다.
The message was that the ultimate goal of the North Korean regime is not to possess nuclear weapons. In fact, it is no nuclear Korean peninsula, secure its regime survival, and to be able to coexist.
Fine. Minister, thank you. We have about 5 or 6, 8 minutes before we do the hot switch up here. An enormous number of issues, and I'm sorry there are only 8 minutes left, but we had to start a little late. Is there anyone who'd like to engage, disagree, tell us what we've missed in this last 5 days, take issue with anything? Please, over here, put up your hands, and then we can move the microphones around quickly. One there.
I'm interested in...
Introduce yourself, please.
I'm Ray Suarez. I'm from public broadcasting in the United States. And a lot of the tone of Davos conversation, especially during this past week, has involved demands of ties of obligation, demands involving missed deadlines and missed target dates. That is, demands being made by the world's poorest on the world's richest. And it's an interesting conversation, but it leaves out the great global middle. Countries that are developing, but countries that have not seen themselves as part of that world's poorest, world's richest back and forth. So I wanted to ask Mr. Naidu and President Kwasniewski to talk about the great global middle. Poland is not a country that's thought of itself as a donor nation. Poland is a country that has a sense that it's wasted a lot of time between 1945 and 1990 and is trying to catch up with its richer brothers and sisters to the West. So are you part of this conversation between the rich and the poor?
And can we have some pretty brief answers, because I can see 2 or 3 people who'd like to intervene as well. Make the questions brief, please, too. Kumi, while the President thinks.
No, maybe you first, please.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. It's critically important that we recognize there's also apart from the whole transitioning countries, which is definitely part of the focus of the global call to action against poverty, but we also need to recognize that there is a deepening levels of inequality in the developed countries themselves, and there's also a pool of growing poverty even in rich countries, and Al could give us great statistics of the situation in the United States. So I think we need to be pushing for a global compact that says that every citizen on this planet needs to have basic access to certain services, and that we need to be mobilizing global resources, ensuring the global policy framework is in there so that we treat poverty and social development in an equitable way across the world. However, I do think there are certain parts of the world as we sit right now, where in my country alone 600 people die of HIV/AIDS every single day, that will require some special attention. But the special attention should not be at the expense of undermining the needs of poor people in other parts of the world.
President.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely crucial question, and is necessary to answer on 2 levels. The first is, of course, we have a big group of transforming countries, and the feeling of these countries is we need support, and we are not ready to give support. We need money, funds, special for modernization, etc., and how to organize extra money for some continents, Africa, etc. And thanks God, we are in different situation as 15 or 20 years ago, because Poland is in European Union, is full member of European Union, and European Union is such structures which organize special structural support for less developed countries. And I think that is one of the best vehicles in the history, which was created 50 years ago and which can work now in favor of new 10 countries. Among these new 10 countries is Poland. And we have such subsidies for Polish farmers. We expect subsidies for Polish infrastructures. And I think this European solidarity is a value itself. And that is very important. That is one of the fundamentals of European Union. And that is why we were so much engaged in this fight for European Union, to be in European Union, and why we think that it's necessary to go with European Union to the next countries. That is, of course, difficult. I was asked as a president, a candidate to European Union, still in Spain, which was the main beneficiaries of European funds many years, how to explain to Spanish public opinion that now the funds for Spain will cut and this money will go to Poland. And I said, well, my answer is very easy. Now is our turn. And if in Poland will ask me next 10 years why we will have less money from European Union or no money from European Union, and we will send this money to Ukraine, I will say because that now is their turn. And that is, simply speaking, briefly speaking, the idea of international solidarity and European solidarity. And that is what is of course, politically important to understand that we have rich countries, we have very poor countries, transforming countries, and I'm grateful to you that you asked me about it, because it's necessary to know that any country has same possibilities to work. And second point is maybe more important. It's not only politics, but social actions. For me in Poland, that is very nice, even fantastic, that in any situation, Polish people, not very rich people, and especially not very rich people, but this quite poor people, they have such very positive reaction if it's necessary to participate in some charity actions, to support some who, etc. They are ready to pay not big money, but own small money for victims of tsunami disaster, or in Africa for AIDS, for fight against AIDS, for many such actions which are worldwide and around the world. So I think the last point. So I think it's necessary to use this very positive feeling and concept of people, because in majority, in fact, the majority of people are okay. They good simple reactions. They are based on which we can fund this solution.
Thank you. It's a glorious day outside. Lunch is ahead, and I don't want to keep you here all until 3 o'clock. But Gordon.
I think that is the problem of rich countries. We discuss about poverty in Africa and they think about lunch. That's not good.
Thank you.
Quickly.
Thank you very much, Nick. I'd like to ask Al Gore a question. You saw on the list of recommendations that there be a G20 at leaders level that could address some of these big issues. This is based on the assumption that the present G8 isn't adequately representative of the world. One of the critical issues that G8 could address, G20 could address, is climate change. How could one sell in the United States the idea of a G20 at leaders level to address major global challenges?
Al Gore.
Well, I don't think it should replace the G8. I think the G7+1 or the G8 still plays an important role. Both China and India will increasingly have voices that must be a part of that conversation as well. But the G20 forum in parallel to G8, I think, is a fine idea, an excellent idea. I would support it.
Prime Minister Howard, do you have any view on that?
Well, you know, who can disagree with that? I mean, of course, G20 is a broader group. It does include China and India. It does include a country like Australia. But can I just, the risk of perhaps making myself a bit unpopular saying it, that one of the things that the world response to the tsunami disaster drove home to me and drove home to Australia is that we still live in a world of nation states, and that whilst all the international groupings under the sun are desirable in their own way, it was the assets of individual nation states immediately deployable because of the executive decisions of their government that provided the first outside assistance. You know, I speak of the assistance that was provided, and this is not to denigrate the wonderful work of organisations attached to the United Nations. And I mean, I'm not attacking the United Nations, please don't accuse me of that, but I want to make the point that I think that we still live in a world where that is still very much a world of nation states, and that if you imagine that you're going to solve every single problem by yet another combination and permutation of international gatherings, I think we can be mistaken, and that's the reason why I tried to make the point in my introductory remarks that one of the things we should never lose sight of is the need for domestic economic reform, because a stronger economy in my country allows us to do things we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. A stronger United States economy, a stronger German economy, all of that, and and the transformation that's occurred in Asia, the fact that in the wake of the tsunami crisis, a nation like Thailand was able to say the only assistance we want from the outside world is technical assistance in relation to things like victim identification. We are able economically to look after our own. Now, I thought that was fantastic. And I said so to Thaksin, the Prime Minister of Thailand. And this is a progress. Now, that wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago if that disaster had overtaken Thailand. It wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago, 5 years ago. But the reality is that that country has lifted itself, and there are myriad examples like that. And I think we really do have to bear that in mind. And could I just, while I got the microphone, because I think I might lose it in a minute, could I just say one thing about the commentary of my friend from Poland about European solidarity? I think European solidarity is a fantastic thing, and I'm all for it. Once again, at the risk of making myself very unpopular in saying this, that I think that one of the offshoots, though, of European solidarity through the policies, the trading policies of the European Union, has been that they have denied access for agricultural exporters. And I'm not talking about wealthy agricultural exporters like Australia, although obviously I have an interest in promoting Australia's interests, but I'm particularly talking about the agricultural exporters from some of the poorest countries in the world. And unless something is done about that issue, I don't think we're seriously able to talk about alleviating problems.
I think it's fair to say the momentum is picking up on that issue, Prime Minister. At this point, I'm very reluctant to bring this part of the session to an end, but I have to do this hot switch, a nimble hot switch with the business leaders. Can I thank you all, Mr. President, Prime Minister, Minister Al Gore and Kumi, and can I ask a fast turnaround, please?